Hello, viewers. Glad you're here today with me. There's more I can do with this nuruk that I got from Korea because on the back of these packages are recipes. There are recipes for makgeolli and for vinegar. And I'm going to be talking about the makgeolli recipes today. There's a recipe on the back of this suyulgok nuruk package. This is Sansong nuruk. There's a recipe. And I have some more Sansong nuruk. And there's another recipe. So 3 recipes to discuss today. These recipes are a lot different than my normal recipe. And so I'm going to discuss them individually and compare them as well. So that's what you have coming up in this video. I've already started brewing these recipes, but I realized I needed an entire video just to discuss the recipes before I show you the results. And I don't actually know the results yet. I've just started brewing. So let's start with the suyulgok nuruk. There's a recipe on the back. Let's go through each step and I'll give you my comments. So first step is dry nuruk in the sun the day before. So that's an interesting thing because that's the bapche method and it's explicitly written down here as a step. I never like it when a recipe says the first step is to do something the day before because that means that you're already one day behind on step 1 if you're just reading it in order. But whatever. It's the bapche method. It's a good thing to do. And step 2, wash and soak the rice for 8 to 10 hours and cook godubab. So that's a pretty long soaking period to recommend, but that's fine. And it just says to cook godubab. It gives no specification of the number of minutes or the kind of rice. Or I just assume that you know that godubab is steamed rice and hard steamed rice. 3, put nuruk, godubab, water, and yeast into container and knead sufficiently. More than 15 minutes. And that's a long time. Normally when I mix these ingredients, I only do it for a few minutes. So 15 minutes is going to be a long time. And I should mention the ingredient list itself. Ingredients, 1 kilogram of nuruk, that's a whole package, 4 kilograms of rice, 8 to 10 liters of water, and you need a sanitized container, a thermometer, and yeast. So notable thing here is that the rice to water ratio is low. There's a lot more water than rice, and there's a greater proportion of nuruk than I normally use. This recipe specifies using 25% of the amount of rice, and that's the amount of nuruk. That's an entire package of nuruk in this recipe. So that's a lot. In my normal recipe, I use 9 or 10% of the amount of rice. That's the amount of nuruk I use, is only 9 or 10%. So those are big differences right there. It's also notable that this recipe tells you to use yeast. Tells you to specifically add yeast, the kind in a package, as opposed to just relying on the natural yeast in the air or the natural yeast in the nuruk. This is telling you to add yeast. Well, that's what I usually do to make things consistent anyhow, so I'm going to continue doing that. A lot of things to say about that, but let's move on to step 4. It says prevent insects from entering with a cotton cloth or mosquito net. So that's going to allow more airflow than I normally do. Normally I put the lid on loose, but actually having just a cotton cloth, that's going to be more airflow than normal. So I'll do that. 5, adjust temperature of container to 25 degrees Celsius. Stir well for 3 to 4 days, then ferment at 15 to 18 degrees Celsius for 20 days. So I'm going to have to use my temperature control chamber to keep that temperature at 25 degrees. And that's warmer than the house is right now. So this is interesting because there's two recommended temperatures, a short period at a warm temperature and then a longer fermentation period at a low temperature. So let's see how that works out. 6, after brewing, pour water according to your taste and drink after adjusting. Interesting thing there is that it never says to filter. It's just assuming you know to do that, and you are supposed to dilute it according to your taste. So that's pretty normal instructions. They just didn't bother mentioning that you're actually going to want to filter this. Okay, and then 7, which isn't really a step, more of a statement, saying there are individual differences in the use of yeast and this is just my Google Translate, the method of holding alcohol, I guess brewing. So please use it as a reference. So I guess what that means is that they don't want you to complain that this recipe is different than how your grandma does it. This is just one of many recipes, and it is a lot different than how I'm used to doing it. Okay, so this is just the first recipe, but it already has some different characteristics. Let's check out this one now. This is the Sansong nuruk made with U.S. wheat. Something in common here, it's telling you to use the entire package of nuruk. But you start off with only 1.6 kilograms of rice. Soak it 5 to 8 hours and steam it, and then cool the go-to-bop completely. So that's even less rice for the amount of nuruk. That's really a lot of nuruk. Okay. And step 2, mix the entire bag of nuruk with that go-to-bop and 4 liters of water. A lot of water. So this has a lot in common with the previous recipe in that there's a lot of water and a lot of nuruk and less rice, but the ratios are even more skewed. And I'll compare the ratios as percentages later in the video. So put the well-mixed ingredients into a jar without a cover at 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. Let it ferment about 4 to 7 days. So here it's just very flexible and a shorter fermentation period. The last recipe could be 24 days of fermentation. This is only 4 to 7 days. And then pour the well-fermented ingredients through a sieve and filter it to make makgeolli. So that's good. It tells you to do the filtering. And it does give some further instructions how to make vinegar if the wine is very sour. So that's interesting. Again, dilute it according to taste. And it has the same kind of disclaimer too. Depending on the region, the method of makgeolli making may be slightly different. Again, don't complain to us that this recipe is different than how your grandma does it. So so that's good. Another interesting thing is that on the package it says to keep it in a cool and dry place, but it also says keep refrigerated in summer. So this is the first place I've read that that recommends you refrigerate your nuruk in summer. And that does make sense if you want to keep it safe from insects, or if you're in a place that's really hot, you don't want your nuruk to overheat. So I guess that's a good recommendation for summertime storage of nuruk. And I also should mention that neither of these recipes have specified to use sweet rice. It just says rice, sal. Now let's look at the third recipe. This is the Sansong nuruk made with Korean wheat. So it's the same company as the previous recipe, but for some reason, this recipe is different. So this is going to use the whole package again, the whole kilogram package, but it starts off with only 1.2 kilograms of rice, so even less than the previous recipe. So wash 1.2 kilograms of rice, soak 5 to 8 hours, and steam the rice Then after washing thoroughly, cool the gotobob completely and mix it with 1 kilogram of nuruk in a well-sanitized jar. And mix well with 4 liters of water. Do not use purified water. That's an interesting comment. I wonder why it says that. I know that using distilled water could be a problem in some fermentation cases because there's no additional minerals or nutrients in the distilled water. But I've never heard of just purified water not being recommended, or actually just being prohibited. Do not use purified water. Okay, so cover jar with cloth and string rubber band for 4 to 7 days in a room at 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. So that's the same temperature range and time period as the previous recipe. And then when bubbles diminish, filter through a fine sieve. So this recipe gives a criteria when you're looking at it. When the bubbles calm down, filter it. And it repeats the warning about purified water. Fermentation does not occur if purified water is used. It also says dilute an appropriate amount of water according to the label and drink. So, yeah, again, super interesting. There's also a vinegar recipe here. I'm going to discuss the vinegar recipes in a separate video. I'm going to have, those are longer term recipes and I'm not trying them yet. So let's look at some things in common with these recipes. For one thing, they're all telling you to use the entire 1 kilogram package of nuruk in a single brew. So that should frighten people from outside Korea because nuruk is such a difficult thing to find outside Korea. It's precious to us and we want it to go as long as possible. But all of these recipes tell you to use your entire package in one brew. So it's a bit frightening to read that. Let's look at the ratios in particular. The ratio that I normally use is 1 kilogram of rice, 1 liter of water, and 90 grams of nuruk. That's the recipe that's in the primer for brewing makgeolli, and I've used those ratios so many times. So that's a 9% nuruk ratio compared with the rice. So you could use 10%, that's not really any different. So here's the percentages. That works out to 47.6% rice, 47.6% water, and 4.8% nuruk. Then looking at the soyulgok recipe, that has less rice, more water, and more nuruk. So the percentages work out to 30.8% rice, 61.5% water, and 7.7% nuruk. So almost twice as much nuruk and a significant decrease in the amount of rice. Then the Sansong nuruk with the U.S. wheat, that ends up having only 24.2% rice, 60.6% water, and 15.2% nuruk. So that's sort of crazy. That's almost 4 times the proportion of nuruk and half the amount of rice in the recipe I normally use. And then the Sansong recipe, the Sansong with Korean wheat, that recipe, that works out to 19.4% rice, 64.5% water, and 16.1% nuruk. So even more extreme. So I've never brewed with these kind of extreme ratios, and also at such a high starting temperature, that 25 degrees. I don't normally like brewing at that temperature. That's sort of at the upper range, but we'll see what happens here. What I'm expecting is that the fermentation is going to start off really fast with that abundance of water and abundance of nuruk, and the higher temperature. a lot of things are going to happen quickly. So I think these will ferment so quickly, and yeah, that's my prediction. I don't know how they're going to taste in the end, and we'll see how these compare with the. I know how my normal brew tastes, and I'll be able to compare the the results of these three recipes with my normal brew. So look forward to those brewing videos that are coming up. And I'm also going to talk later about the vinegar recipes. I know there are a lot of people out there that want to know how to brew vinegar, and they have some simple recipes here that don't require any additional ingredients. They just require a lot of time. So I think that covers what I wanted to say for this video. Let me know if you have any comments. I hope you don't think I'm crazy for using so much nuruk in brew, but that I'm just following the instructions on the package. Thank you for watching.